Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Cose WebEd webinar titled How to Create and Implement an Effective and Easy Discipline Policy and Procedure in 5 Easy Steps. My name is Sean Turner. I am the Content Director here at the Greater Cleveland Partnership and Cose, and I'm also going to serve as your webinar host today. Joining us as a special guest is Cheryl Perez. She is the founder and president of HR consulting and outsourcing firm Big HR, and I'm going to introduce her in just a few minutes. But before I do that, I do have a couple of housekeeping items to go over with all of you. First of all, Cheryl, and she'll talk a little bit more about this during her presentation today, but Cheryl has a special gift that she would like to send over to all of you for registering. And she'd like to send that over to you via email this afternoon. If for whatever reason you would like to opt out of this and you don't want to be contacted after the webinar, that's totally fine. Please reach out to me and let me know, and we will make sure to remove you from the distribution list. You can reach me at sturner, S-T-U-R-N-E-R, at cose.org, C-O-S-E.org. And you can also reach me on my phone at 216-592-2397. My email is also in the emails that you got over the last couple of days reminding you to tune in today. So that's housekeeping item part one. Part two, we have a very large group on the line today, and we want to make this as interactive as possible. And so with that in mind, we're not necessarily going to hold questions until the end. We want to make sure that if you have questions that we get these answered as we move through the presentation. So as you listen to Cheryl's presentation today, think a little bit about how what she's saying interacts with your business and with your staff. And feel free, you'll see on your dashboard, there's an opportunity for you to ask questions. Go ahead and submit your questions as they come to you. They'll only be visible to me, and we're going to take a few opportunities during Cheryl's presentation to get those questions answered. So feel free to send those in, and we'll get them asked to Cheryl. If there are any that we don't have time to get to, we'll answer those offline. So without any further ado, let me introduce our featured presenter for today. Cheryl Perez, as I mentioned, is the founder and president of Big HR, a leading human resources consulting and outsourcing firm focused on serving businesses throughout Northeast Ohio. With nearly 20 years of experience in the employee benefits and HR fields and a reputation for her expertise in service excellence, Cheryl is proud to lead her team at Big HR in relieving clients of one of the most stressful, yet most critical, aspects of running a business by providing cost-effective HR support and compliance services to small and mid-sized businesses. Today, Cheryl's firm is the largest African-American female-owned HR consulting and compliance firm in Northeast Ohio. Cheryl is a certified HR professional and healthcare reform specialist, and she received both her bachelor's degree in business and communications as well as her master's degree in international affairs and business from Ohio University. And without further ado, I am going to turn things over to Cheryl so we can get started here today. Cheryl, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Sean, and welcome, everyone. I can't tell you how excited I am to be on the call with you guys today and to be able to share some insight into how to create and implement an effective and easy discipline policy and procedure, and really in 5 simple steps. And these steps that I'm going to share with you today, you can really implement as a small business owner without having a huge HR team or even an HR team at all for that matter. So I'm very excited to be here and looking forward to giving you guys the tips and the tools, because you know, I get it. I've been in your shoes. I am a small business owner as well. And, you know, the question I always ask is, Would you like to sleep better at night knowing that your employee discipline policy and procedure is fair, smart, and most importantly, legally sound? And I ask that question because I know as an HR professional, but also as a small business owner, the things that keep me up at night mostly deal with my employees, especially the more challenging employees. And those are the things that I'm kind of tossing and turning, and I can't really shut my brain off to deal with. And so my promise to you today is that you will learn what it takes to have the right policies and procedures to handle employee discipline and stop bad employee behavior in its tracks before it's too late and before you really, are a hostage to the entire situation. So we don't have all the time in the world today, obviously, but this should give you a nice start, and I'll try to get into as much detail as possible and answer all of your questions, but I'll also be providing you guys with some resources and tools post-webinar that you can take advantage of that'll really help you get more detailed so that you can actually walk away ideally with implementing a good disciplinary policy and procedure. So I want to thank you guys for joining us today, and stick around because at the end of the webinar, as Sean has mentioned, I have an amazing gift, an HR kind of tool and gift and offer for everybody who's on the call today. So it'll be emailed directly to you for you to be able to download, but you got to stay with me for the full hour that we're here in order to really understand even what it is. So, so are you with me? I mean, that's the question I always ask, and hopefully you are. So let's go ahead and get started. I am Cheryl Perez, that's me. Hi, I'm the founder and president of P.I.P HR, and I've been in HR for about a little over 20 years, actually. I am a certified HR professional, but most importantly, I'm a business owner, a small business owner, just like you guys, who has managed anywhere from 2 employees all the way up to 60 employees. So I get where you're coming from every single angle. From the HR angle, from the managing organizational culture angle, from trying to find the right employees and keep them, just all the same workforce development concerns and issues that you have, whether employees have emotional intelligence, or whether or not they have good customer service skills, or whether they can respond effectively to an email message. Those are all things that I ultimately get, and really they're all things that deal with HR, and so that's kind of why I got into it. And I am proud to say that I've gotten a lot of things right in my career as a business owner and as an employer, just like you, because we are a growing business. But just like you, I've made some mistakes along the way, and I've learned quite a few lessons the hard way too. I mean, believe it or not, HR has been one of those things. And even though I'm an HR professional, I've gotten it wrong sometimes, and I've made quite a few mistakes, and I've kind of learned my lessons the hard way, which is kind of where BIG HR came from, because our goal really is to make sure that I can provide other small and to medium-sized business owners with just that stress relief of that overwhelmingly cumbersome process of employee engagement, employee management, and organizational management. I mean, if you've got employees, even one other than yourself, you will too deal with HR concerns and issues and situations. And so I've made some mistakes, from recruiting and hiring the right person, trying to figure all that out, to not firing the wrong people soon enough. I've done that. Also not acting quickly enough to discipline and correct behavior, which would have been really more cost effective, before I get to the point where I've got an employee that I just want to get rid of. Because the truth of the matter is, as you know, it's cheaper to keep the person, cheaper to keep her, than it is to actually fire, terminate, rehire, recruit, and retrain. So today you'll learn some of the key tools, tips, and secrets to a successful employee discipline policy and procedure. So I always ask this question to kind of get your mind right? So are you currently in a situation where you're worried about a few poor performing employees? Because it's usually not everyone. It's usually just a couple or a handful of folks, or it may have been someone in the past that kind of fluctuates between being okay performer and then back to a poor performer. So the other question I have is, are you being taken advantage of by employees who are always running late or calling off work or just performing their jobs poorly? I mean, discipline applies to any behavior that you want to impact in your organization or effectively change. It can be, people who are always late or tardy. It can be people who call off all the time. It can even be your sales team or your sales folks who aren't quite hitting their sales targets and numbers. I get that a lot from clients. Or it could be a manager or a supervisor who you just don't feel has the skill set to really effectively lead your team. So it doesn't have to be those specific situations. It can also just be, is this person the right fit for this role? And what can I do to kind of get to that next step? So wouldn't you sleep better at night knowing that your business will no longer be held hostage by these folks or by a few bad employees? And I always use the word held hostage because that's exactly what it feels like, isn't it? Like you're just too afraid or you're paralyzed to even be able to escape the scenario. And so, you kind of want to bury your head sometimes in the sand and say, well, I got to keep them because they're the only person who knows how to do that job. Or I just don't even know what I can do, or I don't know what to do or how to do it. And I'm afraid, they're in a protected class. Are you concerned about that? Are you concerned that an employee might retaliate? And, we do live in a very litigious society, and there are a lot of protected classes out there. And I do get the question oftentimes, well, isn't Ohio an at-will state? Absolutely. You can terminate an employee and they can quit, but it still has to be legal. That termination still has to be legal. That doesn't mean that someone can't file a wrongful termination lawsuit against you just because you live in an at-will state. Pretty much the United States across the board, most of our states are at-will. But we obviously still have wrongful termination situations taking place. So at-will doesn't protect you from a claim of discrimination or something like that, something that they can claim as illegal. So, and your other question could be, could a disgruntled employee or former employee negatively affect your business? I mean, will they become a cancer and begin to influence others to act in a negative way that's going to affect you? So, I always tell my clients, and I'm asking you, wouldn't you love to have the confidence of knowing that you're handling everything right and that's going to be in the best interest of your business? I mean, and ideally, by working with small businesses the way that we do, our goal is to provide Fortune 500 type of HR practices, even for small businesses, because sometimes as small business owners, we think, well, I'm small, so, that HR situation doesn't apply to me. And the fact of the matter is, regardless of the business's size, we're all facing similar HR needs and concerns. We all have the same HR obligations that we have to put in place. It's just more difficult for the small or medium-sized business because we don't have those huge budgets to have that entire HR team, those expensive certified people in place. And so our goal as a company is to provide small businesses with those same Fortune 500 practices in order for you to be able to grow to that level. Because if you don't have good, sound HR, it's very difficult to get to that next level as an organization. So where should you even start? That's the question, right? So we're going to walk through some steps today. And the first step is your workplace rules of conduct. It all starts here. Really, it all starts here. And usually your workplace code of conduct is established beforehand. So it's usually inside of your employee manual. But employees must know that they have a fair and reasonable notice of your expectations. That is critical from a compliance perspective with your workplace rules of conduct. And what I mean by that is, if you have a workplace rule of conduct or an employee manual, your employees must know that they've got fair and reasonable notice of expectations. They have to be aware of what you expect. And the number one mistake that I see with small to medium-sized businesses is that they don't have an effective employee manual or employee handbook in place, or they don't have one that's updated, or they don't provide their employees with it other than their first day at orientation. They kind of hand them the book, tell them to read it and say, sign off on this that you received it. And then they never look at it again. That somebody could be working with you for 10 years and they've not seen your employee manual since. So it is a part of the rules out there that they must have reasonable notice of expectations, and reasonable meaning what a prudent person sees. And these rules, they should be clearly communicated to all of your employees in writing. So they can be a separate document, but 9 times out of 10, we see them encompassed inside of the employee handbook or employee manual. They must be compliant with state and federal laws. and they must be consistently and fairly enforced. And that's a critical piece, because if you've got other people on your staff, like managers or supervisors, who are implementing these types of workplace codes of conduct that you have, or they're in charge of monitoring them, if they haven't been thoroughly trained on them, and they aren't completely aware of what they are, you might be seeing some inconsistent enforcement. And so it's really important that the rules be included in that. And then all employer rules for your workplace rules of conduct will fall into a few categories. Most of them will govern your day-to-day matters. So they should address things like attendance, how you feel about tardiness, what's your opinion on dress codes. I had a client this past summer who called and said, I need to discipline an employee. She showed up to work in a tube top and flip-flops. It was a hot day, this past summer, and that's a violation of our dress code. Can I write her up? So our team said, well, let's take a look at what your policy says. Let's take a look at what you've communicated. Has it been clear? Are they aware that tube tops and flip-flops are not allowed? What does your workplace rule of conduct say about dress code? And luckily, we had done their employee manual for them. So of course, it said, we want, business casual. Fridays with permission could be a casual day. We even listed out what casual included. We were very specific. And we also talked about work, no matter what types of dress that were unacceptable. Tube tops were included, short shorts were included, flip-flops, open-toed shoes were included. So the answer was yes, you can, write this employee up and have this conversation. So your rules governing day-to-day matters. You want to make sure that your workplace code of rules of conduct include that. And then you also want to make sure that your rules that, if not followed, may lead to immediate suspension or termination. So you want to show those rules, which is like violence in your workplace or carrying a weapon on the job. Those are, more detailed, more intense rules. These are the ones in your workplace code of conduct that will say, for these, you can immediately be suspended without pay, or you can be terminated. And then you'll also have rules in there that govern more serious conduct, like drug or alcohol abuse, and workplace safety, or sleeping on the job, or violence on the job, or assaulting another employee. So those are the types of things that you want your workplace code of conduct to include. And all of these rules are typically listed in that employee handbook, as I mentioned. So having one and keeping it up to date is really, really important. So if you don't have one, or it's not updated, you definitely want to make sure that you get on that and have someone take a look at it. I have clients that when we work with them, they've downloaded an employee manual from the web and they've kind of tweaked it and made it their own. Oftentimes those are not as complete and as thorough as they should be. And they're also not customized to that employer. They really aren't working through with you what you want your policies and procedures to be that fit your organizational culture and fit what you're trying to accomplish for your business, and being very strategic. So I do recommend that you kind of, work with some custom workplace codes of conduct. So these are kind of what the rules should include, right? And how they should be communicated is very differently than what we typically see. Typically, like I said, you'll give it to an employee as soon as you hire them, you hand them a book. They should be communicated clearly and actually through a formalized training process. And I recommend on an annual basis, reviewing your employee manual at the end of every year and adjusting and changing and fixing any kind of policies or procedures that need to be changed based upon how your organization is changing and growing, based upon state laws, based upon federal laws. And then you want to make sure that you're having a staff meeting at the very beginning of the year, and you are communicating, literally walking people through what these are, and then you obviously have them sign off on them and say that they've received them, but that they also understand them. So you want to communicate them in that way with employees, but also with your managers. Managers having these training and knowing exactly what they are allowed to do and exactly what they should be enforcing is important. And that's usually a missing step. Most employers don't teach their supervisors or their managers anything differently than they teach their employees. And so they've got folks who are at the forefront of, working with these policies and procedures and kind of enforcing and implementing their disciplinary policies, who have not been trained on how to actually do that effectively, consistently, and fairly. So it's really important in this first step that those things are taken into consideration. So I want to take a moment to make sure you're still with me and to see if we have any pending questions or anything like that that's come up with regards to step one.
We do have a question, Cheryl, and you kind of touched on this a little bit, but when you're thinking about the rules that you're putting into your handbook, are there some, knowing that every company is different, but are there some policies that every, or some rules that every policy should include, and what's the best way to kind of write that so that those are clear?
Yes, there are some basic ones that all employee manuals should include. You want to make sure that your manual includes an employment at will statement, because that is what we're dealing with in Ohio and most other states in the United States. You know, there are some policies in there, depending upon your size, that you want to include with regards to family medical leave, because those kind of govern federal laws, you know, discrimination, ADA, those types of things, and then also state-specific laws. Some of the newer ones that we are working with our clients on now to actually have them fixed and updated is like your drug-free workplace policy, you know, especially with the legalization of marijuana in the state of Ohio and the first dispensary actually opening up yesterday. That's a major one. A social media policy, a political neutrality policy, we always recommend is included, as well as, you know, what your process looks like for this, your disciplinary process and your disciplinary policy should also be included. So there are some standard ones, but even the standard ones, the language you would want to definitely customize to your organization and your business. So I always say, you know, work with a professional. You know, attorneys can charge a whole lot. There's companies like ours out there that do them as well, and then we'll also help you deliver the message and communicate the message to the employees and get them trained up on it. So, but definitely you want to look at some of those basic things that I just mentioned.
Great. No other questions at this time, Cheryl.
Awesome. All right, so let's move on to step two. So, believe it or not, step two in your disciplinary process is to have an investigation procedure. So a lot of people say to me, why do I have to have an investigation procedure? The entire purpose of your disciplinary process and policy is to communicate to your employees, these are the steps that you're going to go through. These are the things that we have included as an organization that we include in our disciplinary process to let you know where you stand, but also to communicate very clearly fairness and consistency. And an investigation procedure and process is screaming, we are fair. We are looking into specific allegations. So you're not going to always do an investigation, right? You don't have to do an investigation if you have a manager or a supervisor that says an employee is you know, running late all the time. You don't have to investigate that, right? But an investigation will be implemented in the event that there are more serious allegations, whether an employee accuses another employee of something, whether it's harassment or discrimination or bringing a firearm to work or theft or, you know, smoking on the job or being under the influence. Those types of things, especially when it deals with those rules that we just talked about that can lead to immediate suspension or termination. If you get a report of those things, or if an employee is suspected of those things, you need to include an investigation process and procedure. So allegations of all kind need to be carefully investigated. And if an employee is accused, you should promptly investigate, you should fairly investigate, and you should thoroughly investigate. So as a part of your process, you want to make sure that there is an investigation component. You may not have to always implement it, but if you do, you want to be clear on what it is and what it's going to look like, and obviously have it communicated to the employees and also any managers or supervisors that you have involved in that process. And once you've conducted that fair investigation and you've gathered all of your information and you've done your discovery process and you've gotten all of the witnesses and all of that stuff and the evidence together, then you want to make an independent determination of the facts and of the circumstances. So you have to establish a protocol really for your internal investigations, so that they can be conducted on a uniform basis and include who will conduct the investigation and what process you're going to be used. And you're going to want to completely spell that out in a step-by-step to provide it to everybody. I mean, the goal is to really be thorough and learn all the facts surrounding the alleged misconduct to reach an informed decision as to what occurred. There's nothing worse when it comes to an employee that's been accused of something, and they have not been given the opportunity to respond to that accusation. Think of it like a court of law, right? So someone gets charged with something from another employee or from a supervisor, and before you can really make your decision on what you're going to do from a disciplinary or even a termination situation, you've got to investigate, you've got to get their side of the story, you've got to interview witnesses, and then you make your informed decision. So there's a lot of procedure and policy and forms that can be involved in the investigation process, but your policy needs to be specific about what the process is, who will handle it, including the time frames that people can expect to get results, especially if a particular action or a particular rule says, if we get this claim, like that someone has a firearm on the grounds because it's a safety issue, the employee is going to be suspended and removed from the workplace, suspended without pay, pending investigation. So then your rules and your policy, you want to say, if you get suspended without pay, then the investigation will be done within 3 business days or 4 business days. And if you are found to be innocent, then you will be, receive all of that back pay. So you want to make sure that it's including what time frames, depending upon what actions you take. And there are lots of forms and stuff like that that you need to kind of incorporate. Incident reports for employees to complete and fill out, which allows them to document their side of the story. There's a supervisor's incident investigation form that I recommend. And then there's also a slew of interview questions that should be employed with witnesses, with the accuser, and with the accused. And a lot of times I get clients that say, well, they just shot me an email message, or they verbally told me that this happened, or, they texted me that this happened. Even if that's the case, I recommend, all right, so you've got an initial report, please have the employee complete the incident report form, because it specifically, in their own words and in their own writing, talks about what they've seen, because stories change all the time. And as you're investigating, you want to be able to investigate specifically based off of what they included on the formalized form. It lists all the details that you need. So I do really stress to make sure that as you implement this investigation piece, that you deal with the policy, the procedure, and the forms very explicitly. So step 3 is the actual progressive disciplinary policy. And I do recommend that you use a progressive discipline policy. It's progressive in its development. So what does it look like, right? So it's really taking progressive action. The steps really graduate in their intensity. They must include communication and training of the managers and supervisors, but also for the employees. And they must include documentation. So there's lots of forms that's included in these steps as well. And then also kind of the next course of action that people can take. So step 1 is, verbal counseling. That's usually undocumented. That's, hey, you've been late the last 3 days. Let's let it not happen again. Doesn't need to be written down. You've kind of counseled the employee. The second is an actual documented verbal warning. And there's actually a form that we use for that, where you sit down with the employee and you verbally give them a warning. Okay, I talked to you about it yesterday. You showed up again late for work today. Now I'm documenting that we're having this conversation. And if it happens again in the next 3 days or 5 days, then I'm going to have to issue a written warning. In the written warning, even though the verbal warning is documented, it's less formal. It doesn't require another witness. The employee doesn't have to sign off on it. You're just documenting that you gave them a verbal warning. The third is the written warning number 1, and there's also a written warning number 2. Each employer, has the option to incorporate 1 written warning or 2. Just depends upon what you want. If you only use 1 written warning and then you move to the next course of action, then a P.I.P or performance improvement plan needs to be implemented with the first written warning. If you choose to have 2 written warnings, then the P.I.P or performance improvement plan should be implemented with the second written warning. And the written warning is one where you incorporate a witness. So another manager, whoever is acting as kind of the HR person or guru at your place of employment, and I mean anybody, if it's your office manager or your right-hand person or your partner, whoever is kind of in that capacity, should be your witness, because they should really be functioning from an HR capacity. But you want to have another manager or another witness when you're doing the written warning, and then you want to ultimately include that performance improvement plan, and then really address that next course of action, which we're going to talk about in just a little bit. So I I do want to talk about what a performance improvement plan or a PIP is. And it's really designed for you to be able to say, these are the steps. This is what you need to do. This is what we agree on, the two of us, the employee being disciplined and me as the manager or owner or supervisor. These are the behaviors that we are going to agree on, that if you violate them, or if they don't become improved, or if you don't do a better job, then we agree to move on to the next step in this disciplinary process. It's almost like that agreement piece. And it also spells out very specifically the expectations for the employee. So they can never come back and say, well, I didn't realize that this particular action was going to get me terminated. You know, the performance improvement plan spells it out and is very specific. So it's really important that you give people an opportunity to fix the behavior, and the performance improvement plan communicates what that behavior is, and it allows them the opportunity to fix it. So we've kind of talked about a lot in this section. Are there any additional questions that have come up, Sean?
Yeah, we have a couple. First of all, does it make a difference having two written warnings or one? Have you seen a best practice around that? Do most employers use the two written warnings?
Yes, I do. I do usually recommend the two written warnings, and really it's more for the employer sanity, just because sometimes you get to a first written warning and you really do want to give the person another chance. I mean, typically, especially in a small business environment, we're very family oriented. And so when you're family oriented and you know people on a personal level and you kind of take on even their own stuff, you tend to have a little bit more of a soft hand. And so the second written warning allows you to implement that soft hand and not impact the overall organizational culture in your relationship. So for small businesses, I always say two written warnings is helpful, because the first written warning kind of says, listen, I'm real serious here. Let's get it together. The second written warning says, you know, this is kind of like your last chance. So it's almost giving them, you know, the 3 strikes and you're out versus, you know, after 1 or 2 strikes, you're out.
Great. And we do have one other question. And this person has asked, what if you are the only other employee? How do you get a witness or someone to sign off?
Well, if there is only 2 people there, I would say the day that you're going to actually have that written warning implemented, call someone in, whether it's a colleague, an advisor that you use from an advisory board, whether it's, you know, an HR person that you may outsource things to or talk to, whether it's your business attorney. You know, definitely want to have somebody who's there to kind of witness the interaction and witness the conversation. So the first written warning conversation, you know, you want to plan it out. And we don't have a whole lot of time to get into what the exact process looks like, but there will be some opportunities for you to take advantage of them when you get the email at the end with some tools that I'm going to send over. It needs to be spelled out and planned, and that gives you the opportunity to invite someone else in. So you typically don't have a written warning conversation immediately. You say, all right, you know what, the verbal warning isn't working. On Friday, I need to schedule a formalized sit-down conversation with this employee, and I'm going to call and see who can come and back me up. Great.
Thanks, Cheryl. No other questions right now.
Awesome. So we're almost there. So we're going to talk about step 4. And step 4 is really a part of your disciplinary process, is to provide the employees with an opportunity to appeal. And that really means kind of having an employee grievance and appeals process in place. It's really a psychological thing. When you're talking about employee grievance processes, it's really more psychological for the employees. And really what this piece in your disciplinary process includes is it screams very loudly to anyone who needs to hear it, including the courts, in the event that that ever comes up, is we practice fair discipline, because we even give the employees an opportunity to appeal any decisions. Now, at the end of the day, the employee appeal or grievance may not get the answer that they want, but to show your due diligence in hearing their side and giving them the opportunity to say, I don't agree with this decision and this is why, it clearly communicates, you know, fairness. And that's really what this step in the process is. And it really does also, when you're communicating what your disciplinary process looks like to your employees, and you're having that employee meeting or you're doing that employee training, it says to them, hey, we're not going to just, accept whatever is handed down to you for whatever reason. We're going to give you an opportunity, if you feel it's just, to again say, I don't feel like this punishment fit my crime, or I don't feel like I was given a fair shot. It gives them the opportunity up front, before any courts or any allegations or anything like that gets involved, to provide that opportunity. And so I really do recommend incorporating some type of employee grievance process and appeals to a situation, especially if you've got managers and supervisors that are kind of handing down and participating in the implementation of discipline in your organization. Or even if you want to give the employee an opportunity to kind of say, I don't agree with this. So that's really step 4. And then we're going to move on to step 5, which is, once you're in this entire space, right, the last step is, all right, we've gone through verbal, we've gone through written, we've gone through counseling, we've gone through second written warnings. Now, what are my options? This is the number one question that I get. And it's really the next course of action and how to implement. So there are various things that you can do to kind of hand out a punishment, for whatever the crime is. And they kind of vary in their level of severity. My recommendation is always to make sure that the punishment fits the crime. You don't want to hand down some draconian, punishment for, a little white lie type of a situation. But there are various ones, and I always walk through them with the client. I can't get into a whole lot of detail today, but I will give you the list of some that you might want to consider implementing in your own process and policy. And the first one is to transfer them. If that's possible, depending upon the size of your organization, transferring them to a different department, or, to a different location, or to a different office, or, just kind of getting them out of whatever the situation is that's impeding their performance. And when I say that, I mean, if you've got a salesperson who's not hitting their targets, maybe service is a better option for them. So that would be a transfer. You can also withhold their increases and just say, based upon the fact that you've received a first written warning and a second written warning in the past 12 months, you are not eligible for any raises or any pay increases. You can also demote them if they're in a higher level of position and they've earned that, and then they've gone through a disciplinary process and they're on a first or second written warning and they've kind of gone through that, and now you're saying, well, you know what, I have to demote you in order to kind of fix this. You can also put them back in a probationary period, and usually with the probationary period comes that performance improvement plan. So if you've implemented that, whatever time frame your performance improvement plan meets, that should also be a probationary period for them to say, you're on probation again. We're kind of starting over from scratch, and you're going to be closely monitored and supervised during this time frame. Then you get into suspending them with or without pay. That's actually requiring them to leave the premises and no longer show up for work. That's a more intense one, obviously. And then the final one is to terminate someone. And there's a whole different policy and procedure that we go over when we're talking about termination. But those are kind of your next course of action. There's a few more, but those are really kind of the basics that I kind of give to people. But the key with this entire process is you want to make sure that you're applying your discipline in a fair and consistent manner always. You have to be. Your managers and your supervisors must as well. And that is oftentimes a missing piece. It's a team thing. You can't be fair and consistent as the owner and then have a supervisor or a manager who is showing favoritism to a certain employee, or passing out different kinds of punishment for the exact same behavior. You can't let someone slide for being late for work 3 or 4 times, and another person, you only let them slide once. That is not consistency. And that is when discrimination thoughts and accusations kind of come into play. So it really is a team thing. You also want to ensure that your discipline procedure complies with federal and state laws. So there are a few federal and state laws that kind of impact discipline, medical leave and military leave, because it depends upon if the person's like absent from work and kind of what you're trying to implement with regards to that. Take that into consideration. Also EEO. discrimination, harassment, all those types of things. Take that into consideration. There are lots of protected classes, as I mentioned. There's also the WARN Act, which is the Workers Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act. And it really deals more with mass layoffs or severe reductions in workforce. So if you're not doing that, you don't have to worry about WARN. There's also ADA, or the Americans with Disabilities Act. So those are some of the main ones. Other than that, the employers really do have leeway. As long as your process and your procedure is in place and you can show fairness and consistency, you can pretty much do what you want to do with regards to your discipline procedure and your process. It doesn't mean that an employee, can't accuse you of something, but you will definitely have more of a leg to stand on and definitely be protected from having to settle when you can actually show that you follow this process. This is what your process looks like. Everyone's been trained on your process. Everyone's been communicated with that process, and we're doing it consistently and fairly. So the goal of your discipline is really to provide graduated steps for dealing with problems related to conduct or performance and to correct them. Because as I mentioned before, it is definitely more costly to have to fire someone or rehire someone or retrain someone. And no matter what, you want to document everything. And we usually, provide our clients with the templates and the forms and all the things that they need, because maintaining those documents is important. Proper record keeping is important. Certain types of accusations that can come from employees don't have statute of limitations, or they maybe last 5 years or 10 years. So keeping accurate track of all of your documentation is also important. So what must be documented and why and how? My answer is always everything, all the time, on formal documents. Text messages will work, but they may not cover everything that you need. Emails may work, but they won't necessarily require all the same information if people are sending over their own emails. So I always say you want everything all the time on formal documents. So the procedure forms for the disciplinary stuff, some of the things that you're going to want to take into consideration is written warnings. Do you have a form that will capture the written warnings? And then also your policies must be clear and your procedure must be clear. So you want to provide that. And then also, do you have documentation for your investigation process or for your grievance process? And then also from any performance improvement plans, and then any recommendations of the next course of action. So there are, lots of forms that are involved there, but you want to make sure that you've got kind of documentation forms involved with all of those steps that we've been talking about. And what really happens if you don't document, quite frankly, you won't have a leg to stand on. And if you do have some type of accusation of discrimination or harassment, or actually terminating or disciplining someone for legit reasons, your reasons could absolutely be legitimate. If you don't have the documentation and the right processes and policies and procedures in place, you won't have a leg to stand on to defend that. So that's always the key. You cannot control what other people are going to feel or what other people are going to do. You can't control that. What you can control, however, is how well you protect yourself from those types of accusations. And if you've done a good job at implementing the right stuff, communicating it well, and documenting everything, you won't have to settle. And we see clients all the time that we began working with that have had to settle all kinds of wrongful termination or accusations, or they discriminated against me and they treated me differently. If an employee feels that way, they can do whatever they want to, but you can then come back and say, no, we investigated the accusation. We walked you through all of the steps. You signed off on a performance improvement plan. We gave you the opportunity to grieve it and to file a grievance and to appeal. You also knew exactly what was going to happen at the next step if you didn't follow through with this. And then unfortunately, we got to that point. And honestly, I can show you documentation on 5 other employees that did the same thing that looks exactly the same. So that's really the biggest piece that I always tell people. So hopefully you're feeling good. Are you overwhelmed? Are you excited? Do we have, any questions at this point, Sean?
So we do. When you get to stage 5 and step 5 and those next steps, that can be kind of a difficult, it can be an awkward situation, an awkward conversation, difficult conversation to have. Do you have any feedback on the best way to have those conversations when you're talking about next steps after multiple warnings have been given, to have those conversations so that everyone is in as good a place as possible after that conversation's taken place?
Yes, actually, we have in our discipline toolkit that we provide to some of our clients, because we do provide an actual toolkit that clients can just, purchase and implement themselves. And in there, there's a section where I actually do provide people with detailed tools, and we do kind of some role-playing training videos on how to have those types of conversations. And there's 12 steps, really. So I can't really, probably don't have time to get into all of them. But the first tip that I always tell people is keep the conversation focused on the policy, right? When an employee has violated a policy, then if you focus the conversation on the policy, then the feelings can sometimes be removed. So what I mean by that is, an employee is violating dress code, and you may have your own personal feelings on what business attire is, and that person may have their own personal feelings on business attire. But when you got to have that conversation, you sit down and you say, hey, Susan, I'm just gonna, hopefully no one's name is Susan because I'm not picking on you. It's like Law and Order, I'm making up this name. But Susan, I really want to have a conversation with you now about what our next steps are, because we've kind of been dealing with this dress code issue. And as you know, our dress code policy states this. And we have trained you guys on what that looks like. We've talked about what that is. We've gone through a verbal conversation about what that is, and you're still having difficulty with it. And that policy, is a policy for a reason, and we can't change that policy. So don't make it personal. So, I always say that's one of the most important things. Kind of stick to your workplace rules of conduct and keep the conversation very focused on what exactly they violated. And it's very difficult to argue against that. So that's one key step. And then the toolkit, you guys will get a link for that afterwards, but it provides you with 12 other kind of steps to have those conversations, and there's also some role playing in there.
Great. We have time for one more question, and one of our attendees says that lateness and call-outs are a real challenge. And so how do you support, for example, working moms or people who are caring for others, and then still enforce these attendance policies? You don't want to fire a working mom trying to make it who has kids who get sick and miss school, but it's tough to balance, I guess, fair policies and being an understanding and supportive employer. Do you have any perspective on that?
Oh my gosh, yes, I feel like I live it every day. I really do. So, one of the keys is it's a small business struggle, because you have that culture, you have that relationship with your employees. Sometimes with working moms, for instance, whatever you decide to do, you've got to do it consistently. You can't just do it for working moms only, because that's discriminating against the other folks, right? So maybe company-wide, one thing that we've implemented here, and then I've actually implemented with some of our clients, is a flexible start time. Right. So, for instance, we have a start time that cannot go beyond 9 o'clock, but there's flexibility. So all employees can come in at any time in the morning as long as they are there by 9 a.m. And that can vary from day to day for us. That allows, because I do have working moms, single moms on my staff, and that allows for those situations where, mom is running late because the kid missed the bus and they're stuck in school traffic, but that also is consistent and across the board. If you're seeing a recurring problem, though, and it's affecting the ability for you to run your business successfully, it could also be communicating to other employees, hey, she's showing favoritism, so she better not ever hold me accountable, or he better not ever hold me accountable for the same thing. Then a working mom who has a consistent problem with attendance, for instance, my recommendation is that you kind of begin the disciplinary process. It's funny how people will make sure that they can fix things, and they'll take care of those types of things when they realize that they are on the brink of losing their job or on the brink of losing their employment. And that's why the progressive disciplinary is key, because you give them a verbal warning, and then, a counseling session, and then you actually document a verbal warning. If you've communicated your policy and procedure to your employees, they'll know that they are on step 2 of this 5 steps. And even if you're a working mom and your kid gets sick, if it's consistently happening, then you too need to be in a disciplinary process. And so maybe you can figure out something else. Maybe a sister or an auntie or an uncle or somebody can help assist you, because bottom line is the business still has to function as usual, and you do have to continue to be consistent and fair across the board.
Great. No other questions at this time. Cheryl, is there anything that you want to leave our attendees with before we wrap up?
Absolutely. So hopefully everybody feels that the information is valuable that we've shared so far with them today. And sometimes the question is, which is a great leeway, Sean, is where do you go from here? So I always like to talk about the things that money can't buy, right? Your time, your energy, your peace of mind. And you could put hours of research into figuring it out on your own, or even just guessing and hoping for the best. But my question is, why? I recognize that the information that we gave you today is great, but how do you implement the policies, and how do you kind of get this stuff going in your business? So when I first set out to create peace of mind for my clients, I realized I had 2 options. I could provide advice and on-site support at a pretty premier price, which is one of the services that we provide. That may not be an option for some small businesses. Or we could also design a truly comprehensive toolkit that would truly provide our clients with all the resources that they need, and I knew firsthand that business owners need, because I am one, at a very low price point, so that they can implement it themselves. So both of those are options for everyone today. We've got an employee discipline policy and procedure toolkit. With it, you get everything: your workplace code of conduct, all your forms, the investigation process and procedure, your video trainings, your everything that you could possibly need to implement yourself as the owner, or to get your person that you have working on HR for you to implement. To me, the toolkit is an amazing value, because it frees up your time and energy and stress levels so that you can focus on your business. And I always say, what would it be worth to you to have that peace of mind? So the toolkit is available for everybody who's attended today's webinar, and anyone who is listening for the recording. You will receive an email message afterward with your 2 free gifts, which we're going to talk about shortly, but also the tools that you need to help you implement everything that we just talked about. And it goes into a lot more detail. And because you guys are Cose members, I'm also a Cose member, we're going to do it for a special 60% off rate for the webinar. And so you have a week, if you want to kind of download all the forms and all the stuff, to be able to purchase the toolkit at a 60% off rate. So you've got until, I think it's 1 week from today, to be able to take advantage of it. And then what I'm going to send you guys as your gift for free is the Employer HR Record Keeping Guide. It's a guide that we've actually compiled, and it's based upon federal law. It is valued at $99. We're going to shoot that over to you guys for free for attending today. That helps with the time frames and what records you need to keep and how to keep them. And then also, I'm going to send you guys over the 2018-19 HR Must-Do Compliance Checklist. And it lists out all of the things that you've got to think about from an HR perspective as an employer. It's a checklist for you to kind of check off and make sure you're doing. And that is also a $99 value. So I'm going to shoot those over to you guys today. So with that being said, thank you so much for joining us. We do have maybe 5 minutes for some additional questions. So is there anything else that has come up today, Sean?
I am not showing any additional questions. Cheryl, thank you so much for a great presentation. And again, thank you everyone who registered and tuned in today. I want to, as a quick reminder before everyone logs off, I want to invite everyone to the next episode of the Cose WebEd webinar series. That is scheduled for February 20th at 11 a.m. The title of that episode, Using Video to Amplify Your Marketing and Drive Results. So we're going to be talking about video marketing, how to get started, what you should keep in mind, and what the benefits are, and how to use it to your advantage to create new fans for your business, and really, what's most important, drive your bottom line results. So again, February 20th at 11 a.m. If you go to cozy.org/events, we have registration set up for that. So we hope to see you all there on the 20th. As for today's presentation, that is going to be available. We'll have a video recap recording for those of you who may have not been able to tune in for the full webinar. We'll have that posted, and we'll have a recap of this session as well, so you can get caught up. We'll be distributing that in a future edition of Cozy's Mind Your Business newsletter. So if you're not already getting that, please go to cozy.org/subscribe and fill in your name and your email address next to the Mind Your Business option, and you'll start getting that. Again, cozy.org/subscribe. That does it for today's episode. Cheryl, thank you again so much for taking some time with us today.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, everyone. Hopefully you guys are ready to go out there and get it done.
Sounds good. Thank you all again, and you may all disconnect at this time.